I was 57 the year my daughter told me there was no room for me at Christmas. Not in a phone call, not face to face, in a text message at 7 in the morning, while I was drinking coffee in the kitchen of the house where she grew up. We're keeping Christmas small this year. It's just going to be Reed's family. That was it. No apology, no explanation. 9 words that told me I was no longer part of what she considered her family. That was the Thursday before the holidays. By Christmas Eve, she had called me 11 times. But let me take you back first, because you need to understand who I was before any of this. My name is Victor Marsh, and I spent 30 years as a licensed electrician in Stirling, Ontario, a small town about an hour and a half east of Toronto, the kind of place where you still know your neighbors by name, and the arena floods every October for the first skate of the season. I built a one-man electrical contracting business from nothing, the same way my father built his plumbing operation. One job at a time, word of mouth, showing up when you said you would. My wife Marlo used to say I was more reliable than the power grid I worked on. Marlo died 8 years ago, ovarian cancer. She was 49. We found out in March and she was gone by October. That's how fast it went. I had my daughter, who was 26 at the time, and my son Ian, 22, and finishing his second year of civil engineering at Dalhousie in Halifax. I didn't fall apart. I didn't have the luxury. I kept the business running. I kept the house. I made sure Ian didn't have to drop out. I showed up. Claire came home for a few months after her mother passed. We ate a lot of soup. We watched hockey. We didn't talk about it much. Then she went back to her life in Toronto, and I went back to mine, and we made it work the way people do. Phone calls on Sunday evenings, visits at Thanksgiving, the careful management of grief across a distance. Then she met my son-in-law. She brought him home for Easter the following year. He worked in commercial real estate development in Toronto, the kind of projects that gut old neighborhoods and put up glass towers. Sharp dresser, good handshake. He spent most of that weekend on his phone, which I noticed and didn't comment on. He called me Mr. Marsh all weekend, not in a respectful way, in a distancing way, like I was someone's father he had to get through. He asked about my work. I said I was semi-retired, did some consulting, still kept my ticket current. He nodded the way people nod when they're already thinking about what to say next. He called Stirling quaint twice. I told myself he was ambitious. City people get that way. I wanted to like the man my daughter was falling for. I tried. For 4 years I tried. They married in a ceremony at a venue in Caledon. Beautiful place, limestone barn, fairy lights, catered dinner. I gave a short speech. I wore my best suit. I did not mention the $18,000 I had put toward the wedding from my RSSP. Money I'd been setting aside since Claire was 12. I didn't mention it because it wasn't a transaction. You don't keep score with your children. You give because you love them, and you let it go. After the wedding, I started noticing the slow drift. The phone calls moved from Sundays to occasionally. The visits thinned. The year after they married, I drove down to Toronto for Claire's birthday. 4 hours on the 401, and my son-in-law had organized a dinner with his colleagues. I sat at the far end of the table and ate salmon and spoke to no one for most of the meal. When I left, he walked me to the elevator and said, "Good to see you, Victor. We'll get you up for dinner again soon." We never did. My grandson Callum was born the following spring. That part I want to be careful about, because Callum is the best part of all of this, and I don't want to rush past him. He was 7 pounds 4 ounces. He had Marlowe's chin. I drove to Toronto the day after he was born and held him for 45 minutes in a chair by the window, and I thought, there you are, that's why you keep going. When he was 2, I started driving up on Saturday mornings, timing it so I arrived when my son-in-law was at the gym. Callum and I would go to the park. We'd eat Timbits in the car. He'd fall asleep on the drive back, and I'd carry him up to his room, and Claire would smile at me in the doorway, like she was still herself. Those Saturday mornings are what I think about now, when I think about what was slowly being taken. The visits started getting canceled. My son-in-law had reasons. Callum was overstimulated. They had something on in the afternoon. The drive was a lot to ask at Callum's age. Each reason was sensible enough on its own. Together they formed a wall. The Christmas before the text, I arrived for dinner on the 26th. I'd been asked not to come on the 25th because his parents would be there. I brought Callum a wooden train set I'd spent 3 evenings making in my garage. Little cars that fit together, because Callum liked trains and I liked making things. My son-in-law picked it up, turned it over and said, "Oh, is this homemade?" like it was something to apologize for. Claire changed the subject. I drove home that night on the 401 in the dark, past Belleville, past Trenton, fields on both sides of the road, and I thought about the train set, about the hours I'd put into it, about how he'd held it up like a garage sale find. Then came the text. We're keeping Christmas small this year. It's just going to be Reed's family. I read it twice. I put down my coffee. I looked at the kitchen, at the marks on the door frame where I'd measured Claire's height every birthday until she was 16, at the drawer that still held her grade school drawings, at the window above the sink where Marlo used to stand and watch the backyard when she was thinking. I typed back, "Can we talk?" She left me on read. I didn't cry. I stood at that counter a long time and counted everything I had given and everything I had not asked for in return, and I understood for the first time clearly that keeping quiet had not protected the relationship. It had only made it easier to erase me. There was one thing I hadn't told Claire. I hadn't told anyone. For 15 years, I had been running a small fund out of my personal account. No name, no website. Every year, I took a percentage of what the business earned and donated it, anonymously, to cover apprenticeship fees for young people in Hastings County who couldn't afford the licensing exams and the tools to start a trades career. I'd been that kid once. My father had worked 2 jobs to cover my first year of apprenticeship. Someone had helped him with the costs, and he'd told me once, quietly, that the right thing to do with a gift like that was pass it along when you could. Over 15 years, that fund had helped 43 people get their tickets. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC techs, carpenters. Some of them running their own crews now across Ontario. I also volunteered every March break with the Hastings Quint Habitat for Humanity build. I was the site electrician. I brought my own tools. I helped wire 14 houses in 11 years and never missed a build. Nobody in my family knew about any of it. It just never came up. You don't sit your daughter down and say, "By the way, I've been quietly changing people's lives." You just do it, because it matters, because Marlo would have wanted it, because what else are you going to do with money you can't take with you? But someone else knew. The week after the text, I got a call from a woman named Gwen Okafor. She chaired the Hastings County Community Recognition Committee and ran the local Habitat chapter. She'd finally tracked down who was behind the anonymous fund. My accountant had told her, with my permission, because she'd been trying for 3 years. She wanted to give me the Sterling Community Builder Award at the annual December dinner. I said no. I had plans. My son Ian was flying in from Halifax. He'd called me 2 nights after the text came in and said, "Dad, you're not spending Christmas alone in that house. Book a flight. I'll cover it." I told him I could cover my own flight. Thank you. He laughed and said, "Book it before I do it for you." So I had a flight out of Pearson on the 23rd. Gwen told me the dinner was the evening of the 22nd. I said I was flattered, but no. She said, "Victor, we have apprentices coming who owe their careers to something they were told was anonymous. They want to put a face to it. You can say no to me, but you're saying no to them." I sat with that a minute. "One evening," she said, "we'll have you home by 11. I went. The Sterling Community Center was full. Round tables, centerpieces made by the local high school art class, the smell of coffee and butter tarts. Maybe 180 people. I knew a third of them by first name. I had wired half the commercial buildings in this county. I had coached minor hockey for 6 years. I had plowed neighbors' driveways for 2 winters after the 2013 ice storm, because I had a truck and they didn't. I hadn't thought about any of that as community service. It was just what you did. Gwen spoke for 20 minutes about the fund and the habitat work and things I barely remembered doing. Then a man named Paul Desjardins stood up at table 4 and said this anonymous fund had paid for his licensing exams 12 years ago, and he now ran a 12-person electrical crew in Belleville. 3 of his guys had also come through apprenticeship programs this same fund had helped support. He started clapping before he finished talking, and people around him joined in, and then the whole room was on its feet, and I was sitting in the front row with my hands on my knees and my ears burning, wishing the floor would take me. I am not a man who sits in front of rooms. I build things so I don't have to. There was a man near the back I almost didn't notice. Expensive wool coat, standing along the wall with a drink, watching with open surprise. I recognized him from a photo I'd once seen on a desk. His name was Garrison Webb, and he was a senior partner at Webb Caldwell Real Estate Group in Toronto. He was my son-in-law's largest client. The contracts that kept my son-in-law's consultancy profitable ran through that man's company. He found me by the coffee urn afterward. Victor Marsh. He put out his hand. Garrison Webb. My wife's from Sterling originally. She dragged me out tonight. I'm glad she did. We talked easily, the way two men who work with their hands can talk even when one is wearing a coat that cost more than my truck. He asked how I was connected to the area, and I mentioned in passing that my daughter lived in Toronto, married to someone in real estate consulting. The name landed differently than I expected. Garrison's face shifted, not dramatically, just a small recalibration. A man fitting two pieces together that he hadn't known belonged to the same puzzle. He's done work for us, Garrison said slowly. A pause that stretched out. He has never once mentioned you, and I've had dinner with that man a dozen times. He looked at the room around us, still buzzing. If my father-in-law had just been given a standing ovation by half of Hastings County, I'd have led with that. I'd lead with it every time. I didn't know what to say. That's something, Garrison said, half to himself. That's genuinely something. He shook my hand again and drifted back into the crowd. I stood there with a paper cup and thought about what I'd just heard. My son-in-law had spent 5 years managing the frame of his life very carefully. Who was in it, who was out, who reflected well on him. He'd kept me outside that frame because I didn't fit the image he was building. It had never once occurred to him that his two worlds could touch. They just had, over butter tarts and bad coffee with 180 witnesses. I went home, took off the suit, and went to bed. I want to say that clearly. I didn't call my daughter. I didn't post anything. I went to sleep. In the morning, I packed my bag for Halifax. Before I left for the airport, I sent Claire one text, short and plain. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I'm heading to Halifax to be with your brother. Give Callum a hug from me. Tell him Grandpa will send something for the train set when I get back. I turned my phone off at the gate, not silent. Off, I wanted the quiet. I had earned it. We landed in Halifax in the dark, and I turned the phone back on in the arrivals hall. 11 missed calls, all from my daughter. I sat there and looked at that number, 11. From the daughter who 9 days earlier had sent me a 9-word text, telling me I was extra in a family I had helped build. I sat very still with the phone in my lap, the airport moving around me, and I stared at that number for a long time. There was one message. Dad, please call me when you get this. I need to talk to you. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. I didn't know any of it. My son's was waiting past the barrier with that ridiculous beard he'd been growing since September, grinning like a boy. He wrapped me in a hug that lifted me half off my feet and held on. You came, he said. I said. You told me to, he said. First time you've ever listened to me. I called Claire that night after dinner, after Ian and I had talked for hours at his kitchen table over tea that went cold. She picked up on the first ring. Dad, her voice was already broken. I'm here, I said. I'm listening. She'd seen the community Facebook page. Someone had posted photos from the dinner. Gwen at the podium, Paul Desjardins standing and clapping, my name on a banner behind the head table. The comments had been running for 24 hours. People she had never met, apprentices, homeowners, neighbors, talking about her father in a voice she didn't recognize, because she'd never asked. Why didn't you tell me, she said. Any of it, the fun, the builds, all of it, Dad. People in that town know you. I didn't know half of what they were saying. It wasn't mine to tell, I said. I didn't do it to be known. She went quiet. The text at Christmas. Her voice dropped. He wrote it, I let him. He said it would be the easier way to handle things, and I was tired and I let him handle it. I've been letting him handle things for a long time now. I know that. I didn't say anything. I've been so small, she said. I turned into someone who let her own father get managed right out of her life. I don't even recognize what I've been doing. I let her sit in it, not to punish her, because some things you have to feel all the way through, or they don't take. There's one thing I need, I said finally. One condition. Everything else we can figure out. But this one thing. She went still. Anything, tell me. Callum, I said, and my voice nearly went on the name. I want to be his grandfather without anyone managing it. Saturday mornings, Timbit's in the car, showing him how to use a level. I want to keep every promise I make to that boy. No canceled visits, no reasons. Just him and his grandfather. Yes, she said instantly. God, yes. Dad, he's gone. I asked him to leave the night I saw the photos. It became clear. Everything I'd been letting happen. I looked at Callum and I thought about what I was teaching him, what normal was supposed to look like, and I couldn't. She stopped, gathered herself. I couldn't keep teaching him that. Those words stayed with me. What normal was supposed to look like. Does he still play with the train set? I said. She laughed, wet and quiet. He sleeps with the red car, the one with the little cab. It's on his pillow every night. I closed my eyes. We spent a good Christmas, my son and I. We cooked badly and watched too much hockey and walked the Halifax waterfront in the cold with our hands shoved in our pockets and talked about Marlowe, which we almost never did. It was good to say her name out loud in that cold air. On Christmas morning, Callum appeared on my son's laptop, set up on the kitchen counter, wearing his pajamas and holding the red car up to the camera. Grandpa, can we build more track, like the whole railway? Bring your lunch, I said. We're going to need the whole garage. I'll bring 2 lunches, he said. His grandmother's smile. Right there, on that boy's face, across 2 provinces and a few hundred kilometers of winter. As for the rest of it, my son-in-law's professional situation resolved the way those things do, quietly and without drama. Garrison Webb moved his business elsewhere in the new year. He told me about it months later, briefly, over a handshake at another event, and said only that he'd done some thinking about the kind of people he wanted around his table. I took no satisfaction in it. I want to be honest about that. I felt nothing particular about what happened to my son-in-law's contracts. He had built his entire professional life around controlling how things looked. He had spent 5 years keeping me outside the frame, and the one time the frame widened on its own, without his hand on it, everything he'd carefully hidden came into the light. I hadn't planned any of it. I had just allowed myself, for one evening, to be seen by people who already knew me. He did it to himself, every bit of it. I just stopped standing quietly in the corner he'd put me in. This past spring, I drove down to Toronto on a Saturday morning. Not 4 hours dreading the welcome, just a drive. Just a grandfather going to see his grandson. Callum was in the driveway in his hockey gear when I pulled up, waiting, all padding and no patience. We went to the rink. We ate Timbits after. On the way back, I let him steer the car in an empty parking lot, his feet not quite reaching the pedals, and he shrieked with something I can only describe as pure. Claire watched from the bleachers during the skate, and when we got back to the car, she walked over and held on to me in the parking lot. Cold wind coming off the lake, other families loading up around us. She didn't say anything grand, she just held on a moment longer than a regular hug, and then let go. Thank you, she said quietly, for not closing the door all the way. A father's door doesn't close like that, I said. It's not built to. I drove home as the sun went flat over the fields west of Belleville. CBC radio on low, heater running, the kind of drive that doesn't feel long. Here's what I've learned. And the only reason I'm telling this story is that I learned it the slow and expensive way, and maybe you don't have to. For years I thought keeping quiet was a form of love. I thought if I never pushed, never asked for anything, never took up space, I was making myself easier to have around. What I was actually doing was making myself easier to erase. Every inch I gave got taken. Peace is not the same thing as love, and a man who disappears to avoid making waves doesn't protect the relationship. He just makes the disappearing easier for everyone. The moment I stopped shrinking, everything shifted. Not because I fought, not because I schemed. I walked into a room full of people who had never needed me to be anything other than what I already was, and I let myself be seen. The truth did the rest of the work entirely on its own. If someone treats your presence as optional, believe them. Then go find the table where your absence would leave a gap. Those tables exist. I promise they exist. Mine was across 400 kilometers of Trans-Canada Highway, and I almost didn't go. Dignity is quiet. It doesn't need to win an argument. Sometimes it's just a man packing a small bag, sending one plain text, and turning his phone off at the gate. Callum called me last week on his own, figured out the tablet, held it up too close to his face the way kids do. Grandpa, this summer, the whole railway, you promised. I keep my promises, I said, you know that. He nodded, very serious, then he held up the red car. I still have it, he said. I never put it away. I know you didn't, bud. And somewhere across the kitchen behind him, I could hear Claire laughing at something, easy and unguarded, the way she used to laugh before someone taught her to be careful about it. And I thought about Marlowe, who always said you don't build things to last, Victor. You build them to be used. A good thing should be worn down from being loved. She was right about the houses. She was right about the trains. She was right about this too.